odd here, and I think that the powers that be are really desperate to get this thing worked out. Let me show you what the backlog looks like. In Florida, for example, they have what's called the rocket docket. It's grinding to a halt. This is a case where they don't have to appear before a judge, but they have an administrative judge who, in essence, spends about 30 seconds per mortgage and just clears it just in a row. They can go through 500 a day, and all that has been put on hold because of the financial challenges. The circuit just in Clearwater, Tampa alone covers an area that has a backlog of 33,000 foreclosure cases, and they're piling up now at 1,000 a day now that the moratorium is in effect. The cost to the potential banks is astronomical. The tab could reach $6 billion. Investigations of how banks are seizing homes will prolong foreclosures by as much as 3 months, and it costs banks approximately $1,000 a month for each month that the house is still in the pipeline, not being sold. Hiring firms to go through the legal technicalities and curing the mortgage defects, the paperwork defects, would cost them $1 million a year, each bank. So this sounds like, to me, a good excuse for the banks to cut a plea deal and settle for what the public thinks is a big fine, but it would be small change compared to losing the right to foreclose. So frankly, my assessment is I don't hold out much hope that the powers that be are going to let all these foreclosures go down the drain over a technicality. The White House is already sending a message that it won't back any federal moratorium on foreclosures. And the Washington Post wrote this week that federal regulators sought to prevent the growing furor over improper foreclosures from escalating by pressing mortgage lenders to quickly replace the fraudulent court documents, and insisted that foreclosures continue apace. So that's business as usual. Well, sadly, it's not just foreclosure technicalities that are wrong. Some banks are violating the laws in other ways. Some are hiring people to kick in doors, to evict the owners, change locks, and without even properly filing the foreclosure proceedings before. They're using bogus claims like the power's been turned off, which they did, by the way, and we have to safeguard the house from freezing. Of course, that doesn't explain that they're doing this in summertime, and no one believes, let alone a judge, that that excuse is going to hold water. So ultimately, I'm going to go back to the big picture then about where we're heading with this economic problem. We have a fiat money system, and essentially the entire establishment is only going to throw more money at the issue. The IMF, for example, is proposing this week that their solution to the problem of $4 trillion in government debt coming due that has to be rolled over in the next 24 months, the solution to that is to print more money to recapitalize them. Of course, they don't tell the American public that printing money is not true recapitalization. But they have an obligation, says the IMF, to inject fresh equity in the banks. Of course, this merely postpones the day of reckoning and solves nothing. Now we hear a lot of talk about replacing the dollar with a basket of currencies. Equally bad idea. This can't happen unless there is an equal rate of inflation agreement between the various currencies in the basket. That seems almost impossible or unlikely now, since every nation is in the midst of a currency war of devaluation. Let me explain. Each country in recession is trying to debase their currency faster than other countries, so that for example, the dollar will appear cheaper to other countries, so that it will increase our exports. In other words, if the dollar's cheaper, people have higher value in the euro to purchase American goods, and it causes money to flow in and exports to flow out. But there's a folly in this, because, in fact, it doesn't work when everybody's competing against another, and you can't beat China. China is devaluing its currency faster than anyone else, making sure that its products are cheaper than Japan.
And they've got, and interrupt Joel, during here in the live money bomb, they have 1,700,000,000 people, 1 billion working folks working at slave wages. It's not just that their currency's lower, it's that the wages are lower. We're competing against prison labor, 4 million in this country, the 30 million illegal aliens. And you talk about a folly, obviously you know and have written about and talked about it. There's not a folly. There's a folly in what they publicly say all this is for, but we know what the end game is: destruction of the industrial economy, consolidation in a tiny elite's hands, so everybody is so dependent on these globalists and so bankrupt that they're under their control?
Well, you know, they can only keep this going so long, though. In other words, to really do that would take a collapse, and they run the risk if there is an economic collapse that they themselves could be booted out of office, and you could get a real wholesale political revolution going on in the United States. I don't think they're going to give us that opportunity. I frankly think they're going to continue to milk this system downward slowly. And in fact, I think they can keep it up, believe it or not, for another 10 years. They've got that much power to continually inflate. If they do it slowly enough so that it doesn't get the panic inflation levels, then in fact I think they can keep milking this along. And of course they've got the press behind them. They've got the financial press. They have the Wall Street pundits that come out every night on television to assure people that the recovery's just around the corner. And what can people do about it? They're actually powerless. We can't stop the system. If we even demanded that they replace Timothy Geithner, who would we get? We just get another shill from Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan to be secretary.
Hey, I know you talked some about this, but I remember 10 years ago, Patriot groups and others talking about they don't have the deed on the mortgages. They're selling it over and over again to the Chinese. And I'd roll my eyes at most of it. In the last 5-6 years, I've confirmed it's true. Now, Bank of America, the biggest mortgage holder, and others, it's turning out are suspending all foreclosures. They have ripped off the Europeans, private pension funds here. They've ripped off the Chinese, selling some mortgages 10 times over in the derivatives. They're stealing houses they don't even have the deed to, and houses that are paid for. That's coming out in court. And just a week ago, they were saying, oh, there's a few paper problems. Now mainstream news, BBC, AP, is saying total mortgage fraud. Won't that destroy confidence? And I don't think it's totally designed. Part of it is, but they've overcompensated for their hubris, and they've been so greedy and so good at stealing that they've just committed crimes so big, I don't see them getting away with it. Can you comment on the whole mortgage situation?
Yeah, I do think they will get away with it. And the reasons they will, the bigger the crisis, all they have to do is claim that this is going to bring down the entire system. There'll be no more mortgages sold, and the whole housing economy will come to a collapse.
So they hold us hostage again,
That's right.
And they're announcing to fund this, they now want a 5% tax, at least on pensions, and the government will take control of the pensions, and then what begins as a 5% becomes a 50%.
That's right. You see, the only solution we would have, because the people can do nothing in and of themselves, it's all in the hands of the courts, and the courts are controlled.
But there have been a lot of rulings against them, and that's why they tried to get Obama last week. He actually did something good. I guess a blind hog can find acres. Broken clocks are right twice a day. He vetoed, but it'll come back during the lame duck. He's set to sign it, the word is.
He didn't veto it. He just refused to sign it.
Exactly. He said, exactly. To be technical, he said, I'll sign it later. Or I won't sign it right now.
It's a pocket veto right now.
Yeah, a pocket veto is the proper term. Thank you, Joel. But the issue is that he's refusing to freeze all the mortgages right now, but he's saying, oh, some of this is good. And then you've got Reid and others calling for it to try to save their hind end in the election. But to try to have the Congress pass a law saying we're allowed to basically break the law with the way we run these mortgages, that is an amazing attempt to rubber stamp financial tyranny, isn't it?
It is, but here's the way I think that they're going to get away with it. They really will cut a deal with the bank to say, all right, we have decided we're going to fine the bank, $2 billion. The banks will say, oh, this is terrible, you're going to break the bank. They're laughing all the way to the briar patch. $2 billion is nothing compared to what they stand to lose if they get these foreclosures pulled out from under them. But listen, this is a conspiracy, but I don't have to tell you that.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you the floor because we're almost out of time in 12 minutes. Talk about this. Talk about positive things we can do, waking other people up, auditing the Fed, and other solutions. Joel Skousen, you've got the floor.
Well, the thing that we have to realize, as I said, is this is a conspiracy between powerful forces within government. They control all of the big banks. They control the SEC. They control the bank regulators. Now, these people, just as in Israel, when they pretend to be right-wing, they have to, play up to their constituencies. The people in these agencies have to prosecute a few small chickens. They have to convince people that what we're doing is following the law. But in fact, when it comes to push comes to shove, I can tell you, guarantee absolutely that the big banks will never be taken down. They'll maybe have to pay a little fine. It's just like Blackwater. Blackwater's never been taken down for all the crimes that they committed in Iraq. They're continually giving new contracts. They morph into different organizations. The banks, what do you think happened to the Lehman Brothers people? They got absorbed by the others. These are insiders. They don't take down an insider without giving them a back door to these things. And that's why it never is, resolutions are never as the public thinks. Look at what happened. Let me talk about what people can do. I am convinced that the only solution for the American people is what no one wants to face, and that is the issue of conspiracy. We have collusion within fiduciary areas of responsibility in government, which is totally illegal. It should be prosecuted as conspiracy. But how can the people do that? They can't do it because the only arm of enforcement in the government is controlled. All law enforcement has a black side of it. It's controlled by the dark side of government, and I'm convinced that they control the majority of judges in key positions as well. Once you lose the judges and the enforcement apparatus in government, there's nothing you can do. Now, if you can elect Congress that will clean house, that's a really a long shot, because so much of what politics is all about is promising benefits. We in the constitutional conservative movement cannot promise benefits. They can, and so we continue to lose the unthinking majority. So ultimately, these people are going to get bailed out. I'm convinced of it. Foreclosures are going to continue apace. They have to allow a certain amount of time for people to rant and rave and feel like they're getting their pound of flesh. But ultimately, nothing will happen, just like in the bailout. AIG is still alive. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, they're alive, and they prospered in this. Now, ultimately, though, here's our one opportunity. We need to prepare people for what I've been telling them for many, many years, and that is that the United States government has one out for all of this fiat money and this debt pyramid that they're building, which they're not slowing down whatsoever. No matter what they talk about balancing the budget, it will never be balanced, never be slowed down. To tax and to pay for it is too painful. They're going to continue to deficit spend and play all of the games they are, and they can run it for another 10 years until they run us into World War III. That World War III is not going to be Iran. It's going to be Russia and China against the United States, and we're talking nuclear weapons. We're talking about a nuclear strike on our military and financial centers, and they will want that to happen because it gives them an excuse to come out of their bunkers and say, all of the records are gone, all of the computers are gone, we simply have to start all over again. Mark my words, Alex, that is exactly what's going to happen someday, and people don't want to admit that horrible conclusion that anyone would be so evil that they would do that to our own nation. But you can mark my words that someday it will happen. And that's why, here's what people must do. First of all, they've got to start to get out of the paper markets. I'm recommending now that people sell their 401ks, they get out of their pension programs as much as they can. It's better to take the penalties and cash out now and start to pay down your mortgage. Anything that you have debt-free, you're going to be able to keep as long as it's not in a nuclear target area. And it's very important that people start to accumulate real assets. And I don't recommend extreme amounts of gold and silver because I know that's too expensive for most of our listeners. But paying down the debt and buying and stockpiling materials that you need in everyday life reduces your future need for money. So if you don't have debts, if you own your home, you can barter, you can trade. It's not hard to find enough money to pay your taxes, especially if you've reduced your need for money. So I believe that people should keep at least $5,000 in cash around. I think they need about $5,000 in gold and silver, mostly in silver, especially silver dollars. Silver dollars are fat, heavy-looking coins. You are much more able to barter that coin away and convince someone it's worth $20 than you are to convince someone the little tiny gold coin is worth $2,000 and then try to get change for something that you want to buy that's $600 and you want $1,400 in change. It's just not going to happen. So I think it's very important to be very realistic, to work within your means, and to prepare as long as Alex has done a great job in fighting for liberty, and I'm trying to fight for liberty. Stan Monteith, who's going to be on after me, has done a great job in fighting for liberty. But we must not delude ourselves into thinking in the hubris that we're going to win this thing. We have to prepare at the same